Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shaw.
Hello and welcome to the Women Today podcast. This week we've tackled some serious issues from homelessness to the pros and cons of single-sex education. But we have also been absolutely overwhelmed by musical talent. And we're joined live in the studio by a young singer called Coral, and Rachel Hare, an incredibly talented harpist, also popped in as well. But first, here's what happened when we were joined by Zeba Clark, or Zeba Kaleem, or Madeleine Conway. Why so many names?
When I started writing, my first book was a romance, and Zeba didn't seem like a very romantic writer's name. My grandmother was called Madeleine Conway, and the other temptation was I knew that if I was writing romance, she would be spinning in her grave because she was a very snooty reader. She was a big intellectual snob. So Madeleine Conway was my first writing name when I started writing romances.
So what should we call you today?
Zeba, please.
Okay, Zeba. We're going to talk a bit more about your writing in just a moment, but first, just take me back to your early childhood. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the States. My parents met at Cambridge, and then we went to Pakistan because my father was from Pakistan, and he got a job in the States, and so I grew up there and was at school there, and then moved to UK when I was about 9, and went to a all-girls boarding school.
Very interesting. As I say, we will be talking about single-sex education a little bit later, but you went to university in Aberdeen. Mm-hmm. What was it that you really wanted to do?
Always I wanted to write. That's been the big thing since my very first story I wrote when I was about 5, and my mum still has it. And it's about a whiskey bottle that goes for a walk, eats a mushroom, and then realises it's poisonous. So it sticks a label on itself saying poison. And that was the moment when I thought, yeah, this writing thing, this is fun.
So you wrote throughout your childhood?
Yes, totally. Yeah.
And how much of that was based on the experiences that you were going through? I'm not necessarily thinking about the whiskey bottle in particular, but, you know, people, particularly young people, go through pretty turbulent times sometimes, and writing can often be an outlet for that.
I think that's where I kind of got into fantasy much more. I was a classic reader in the sense that I read Narnia books, Lord of the Rings and things like that. My big passion for a while was the Black Stallion books. And so I wrote lots of desert island. I came across a whole load when moving, and there were all these awful desert island books with, instead of a boy and a horse, there was a girl and a horse and races, and it was a beautiful Palomino, gorgeous horse. So lots of horse books that I kind of scribbled away, and then desert island. And then as I got older, more angsty, and I would not want to revisit some of my teenage writing at all.
Did you always keep a diary?
Yes. Yeah.
And you still do that?
Yes.
So you always wanted to be a writer then. You went to university in Aberdeen, as I say. What path did you take?
After I left university, I became a journalist, but a very kind of unusual journalist in the sense that I was doing industrial and specialist economic journalism. So first I got to write about things like refrigeration and ships and all sorts of things to do with insurance. And then I became a natural gas specialist. Which
pause for snigger.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd go to parties. I was in my 20s, and you know, I'd meet a bloke, and he'd say, "What do you write about natural gas?" Ha ha ha. So it was a good icebreaker. And then I met this chap who was about to go to China as a diplomat, and that kind of upset my plans a bit. And at that stage, I retrained as a teacher. And I'd hated school, so it was the last thing I ever imagined I would be. But I went into schools because before you train as a teacher, you have to kind of do sample days and prove that you've got the commitment to the vocation. And at that stage, I went into a school, a sixth form college in Brighton, and it was like, why didn't I realise that this is one of the best jobs? You get paid to sit and talk about books all day. Fantastic. So I trained as a teacher, and I've been teaching for 20 years now.
So what brought you over here?
Job. I'd been working in Brussels at a school there, and it was on a contract, and the contract came to an end. So I was looking around for a job, And I looked on the internet, I looked at the TES where all the teachers' jobs are, and there was a school which said King William's College, and I looked at the website and it was really pretty. There's this beautiful beach and gorgeous pink skies, because I think they had some poor guy out at dawn taking photographs of the school. And I thought, that looks really interesting. And the job was head of department at King Bill's. And that was definitely what I wanted to do. And then I came to the school and I had 2 job interviews in the same week. One at a very posh girls' school in Oxford, and this one. And I was like, I don't know which one to go for. And I said to my husband, okay, so I've got these 2 job offers. Which one? Oxford Girls' School, Hermione Land, because Emma Watson went there, or the Isle of Man. And he said, let's give the Isle of Man a go. So that's how we ended up here.
So we know that you write romantic fiction. You've been published romantic author. I just wonder how you start a romantic novel. I mean, how much do you draw on your own experiences?
I'll be honest with you, not much. I think of romantic fiction is really there's sword and sorcery, which is fantasy, and there's romantic fiction, which is fantasy. Sometimes you get a mixture of the two. There's a really magical writer, Naomi Novik, who writes dragon books, and there's basically a central romance between a guy and a dragon, but basically it's romantic fiction, and the key thing is you start with a happy ever after. I've been quite cheeky with a lot of the romances I've written, and I basically stole from this really good writer I know of called Shakespeare. So, because I had 3-book contracts, and I was like, you've got to write a book, and you've got 18 months to do it. I can't think of any plots or anything. So Much Ado About Nothing was really helpful. And Twelfth Night has been pretty helpful. But you obviously tweak and play. And Shakespeare, he nicked his plots too.
So when and where do you write? How do you fit it into your daily schedule?
When I'm actually writing, the best way I find of writing is actually in November. Every November there's National Novel Writing Month, which is run, it started in the States, but it's worldwide now. So I always block off November and I say that is my main writing month. And the aim is to write 50,000 words in November. So I've done that about 5 or 6 times. And what it does is it gives you your first draft. So I plan beforehand. I'm in the middle of planning at the moment. And I do all sorts of maps and little bits of writing, like character-based stuff, and I get plots kind of roughly in my brain. And then literally November the 1st, I sit down, and usually if it's a weekday, from 8:30 till 10:30, and then if it's a Saturday or a Sunday, it's usually from 2 till 4, 2 till 5.
I was just going to say, being my daughter's teacher, you don't take November off, do you?
No.
That's fine. That's fine.
I'm in school and marking and doing and planning and everything like that. But
and I understand you've just got a contract to do young adult fiction.
Yes.
What made you want to make that move?
Well, I'd written these 5 romances with the name Madeleine Conway, but for a long time I'd kind of had this idea about a teenage boy who makes his dreams come true. And at the time, I wrote it about 10 years ago, and at the time there were a lot of young adult books coming out. There was a lot of Harry Potter related stuff. The fantasy world was very kind of, everyone was in a school. And I thought, for me, Jove, the character, he turned up in my brain. And I think that very often happens to writers. Joe turned up, and he was a typical teenager, but he also had tweaks and quirks, and he's a very individual kind of a boy. And of course, he wasn't going to do any of, he's a normal kid at a normal school, not a boarding school or anything like that. And his first dream was a Lamborghini. And then what would happen if you woke up and there was a Lamborghini in your drive and you didn't have the keys and it was blocking your mum's way out of the house? And so it was a real what if. Joe came first, then the Lamborghini, because that was what he was dreaming about. And then he had a ropey friend, Silas, who gets him into all sorts of trouble, and it just escalated from there. So the story was there. And then also I was very naughty. I had a really good time because I took the names of students and teachers, and I and characteristics, and I just threw them all up in the air and played with them and put them in the book. And it was a pure release from writing romantic fiction, which is quite strict in its conventions. And I just put everything in. So it ended up having Elizabethan scenes and a scene on a Turkish mountainside and all sorts of nightclubs. And Joe ends up going to Sardinia and all sorts of things. So it was like everything. I'll put everything in it. And then I put it away. I just kind of put it away because I started a master's in education. And I kind of forgot about it. So, and then I came and I was going through my computer files last year, and I came across the computer file, tidied it up and sent it out to a new publishers, and they have said they're interested in going ahead with it, and that will be out as an ebook probably in the next 2 months or so.
Ziba, I'm exhausted just listening to you. I'm also quite relieved, though, that you haven't got a notebook and pen with you, because knowing that you do draw on real life experiences, I'm sure there are some characters in this room, particularly looking at Joe.
She always picks on me, Ziba.
That could have been a nice thing to say. It could have been.
Okay.
I mean, it could have been.
But
do
it
you
wouldn't
think that everybody does have a book inside them?
I think everybody does have a book inside them, but they don't necessarily have the technique to get it out there. And I think that's the thing that people are really... they don't necessarily know how to go about the first steps of setting it up in their own brain. And also we all work differently. So there are some people who can just write and it will come out and there will be more or less the stream of consciousness and you can shape it. And then there are others of us who have to kind of shape it a lot more before we sit down and write. And it's kind of finding out the way to actually open up your voice. And that's really important.
How do you feel about condoms being handed out to teenagers at high school?
I have mixed feelings about that. I'm not sure if handing them condoms doesn't encourage them into sexual activity too early, or would it save unwanted pregnancies and possibly STDs?
I don't mind, because my daughter's just turned 17. I would have asked her to go on the pill now, because so many people are getting pregnant. I was 16 when I had my eldest and everything, so... because we wouldn't go to the doctors and get them or anything. So, yeah, I don't mind.
I don't really know how I feel about that. It depends on the person.
Well, it's better than having all these illegitimate children about, isn't it? So I think it's the best thing there is. Also for diseases.
I think it's a good idea, yeah. I think anything that promotes safe sex is a good thing, to be honest with you. I can see the other side of the coin where people might think that handing out condoms is encouraging it, but I think kids these days, they're just going to do that sort of thing, I think. So better to be safe than sorry.
I think probably we do need to be realistic and live in the real world. I don't think that would lead to somebody having sex just because they were given a condom. I can see why it might be a bit controversial, however, but I think they'd make lots of jokes about it and fill them with water and probably throw them at each other.
No, I don't think you should. Well, the age of consent is 16. I think you'd be encouraging it.
Yeah, they should be handing out condoms to 13-year-olds because everything's getting younger and younger now. It's like them drinking before they're allowed to drink, having sex before they're supposed to have sex. Everything's getting younger.
Well, I think it's more down to sex education really than just handing out condoms. Parents should be stepping up and speaking to their kids about contraceptives or abstaining, shall we say.
Well, they should be thinking about sex at 13.
So I just think it's just encouraging. They need just education, I think.
I think a lot of kids will take advantage of it. I think, personally, parents don't do enough. Too many people rely on teachers.
It's much less awkward than going to the shop and buying them, I would say. And you can't go to like nightclubs and get them off the bar and stuff. So, yeah, I would say teachers would be the way to do it.
I think if they've had the right education, I personally think it's not a bad thing.
When I was in high school, I thought I was peer pressured actually into doing it by my friends. So it would make me feel a lot better if my teachers handed me condoms while I was in school. Yeah.
But whether or not they'll use them when you give them to them is another thing.
OK, so some differing opinions there. We're asking you, should condoms be available in the island's secondary schools? It is a question that's been debated in the Isle of Man a couple of times before, first in 2006 and more recently in 2011. And in that year, in Tynwald, the MHK Brenda Cannell asked the then Health Minister David Anderson whether he would revisit the department's policy not to supply free condoms to become even more proactive in reducing the number of people diagnosed with HIV. Mr Anderson at that time said no, and to quote Isle of Man newspapers, he steadfastly refused to be drawn once again on the issue of providing free condoms to vulnerable groups and sexually active young people. Now here's what the Department of Education and Children has to say on the matter today.
Whilst condoms are not distributed or made readily available, schools take seriously their responsibility to educate about the role of condoms in the prevention of pregnancy and STI transmission. PSHE, Personal, Social, Health and Economic Education, provides an opportune time to do this while encouraging informed choices about sexual health and well-being.
That's the opinion of the Department of Education and Children in response to our question this morning. We want to know now, is it time to bring up this subject in school once again? How do you feel about condoms being made readily available in schools, Jo?
I'm really mixed on this. I suppose I can see it from both sides, definitely. I can imagine my daughter's year using them as water balloons if they were handed out, which would be a waste of money. But also I can see why it would be a good idea, because it'd be less embarrassing than going to a chemist and buying it themselves. A little bit mixed up on this one. I'm not quite sure, if I'm honest.
Kate? I think we absolutely should be giving out condoms in schools. I think everything we do in terms of sex education on the Isle of Man is about teaching young people to protect themselves, to not get pregnant. And if we are saying all of that, why aren't we providing the means to actually prevent it? I think it's just a no-brainer, in my opinion, for sixth formers, to put on that caveat.
It's interesting you're talking about giving out. I mean, I think absolutely they should be available in secondary schools. I don't know about sort of giving them out. I think the whole idea of normalising them, so people are very used to seeing them, it's not such a big deal anymore, people talking about it and surely having a bit more of a responsible attitude towards sex generally. Dr John, what do you think?
I think I'm more with Jo. I do have very mixed feelings. As a professional, I suppose what I'm most concerned about is unwanted pregnancies and keeping people well from a sexual health point of view. And from that perspective, then I think the more we can do to make available and, as you say, open in society the availability of various forms of contraceptive, the better. Having said that, I think as a dad and as a person of faith, I have some problems with the over-sexualisation of society generally, and I think that there are lots of things going on cumulatively which are almost subliminally encouraging sexualisation in society, and that's from the media through to education, through to music, through to all sorts of stimuli that will attract young people. And I think adding to that the over-availability, and one could argue what over-availability is, of contraception can arguably encourage the sexualisation or the normalisation of sexual activity in schools.
Jo?
I think what Kate said before as well, you hit the nail on the head when you said sixth form. I think that's exactly the right age group that we should be aiming it at, because as a parent of a 14-year-old who I know isn't as advanced as some other 14-year-olds, I think it would frighten her to be handed a condom.
But we're not talking about handing them out, we're talking about them being made available. And I do think we run a risk of being so scared of talking about contraception and of showing children what contraception is. We're not getting it right at the moment, so surely something needs to change.
And also, to go against slightly what John was saying, I've said it before and I'll say it again, teenagers have sex and they're going to carry on having sex. Why don't we do something to stop them becoming ill, stop them catching something and stop unwanted teenage pregnancies?
I agree. However, there's a lot of naive children out there that aren't as fully advanced, and I think it might possibly frighten them.
But giving them a condom isn't going to make them have sex.
Well, it also may encourage thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Because if others are getting these, why am I obviously I need to do something maybe about this.
But I think giving them, or not giving them out, having them readily available has to go with the education to explain when they need need to be used, how they're used, what they're for, and when you're ready, here they are, and they are not something to shy away from or be embarrassed about.
Yes, I agree on that.
People do have sex, of course. Young people have sex, and actually there was a comment I think made earlier by one of the phone interviewees in terms of 13-year-old boys being exposed. 13-year-old boys will think about sex; their hormones are developing. We have to recognise that, and I have no qualms about that. However, people also drink alcohol. People also take drugs. And to say that because people are doing it anyway, therefore we should just make the ability for them to engage in that activity more widely available is, as you would say, Beth, on several occasions today, a no-brainer. I don't think there is necessarily a follow-on for sexual activity. I think just because lots of young people are having sex, and increasingly lots of young people are having sex without thinking the consequences through, I don't think that's a reason for making sex and the opportunities to have sex.
Let's have some of your thoughts then. Frank says, yes, there should definitely be condoms in the island secondary schools. Starting in the staff room would be a good idea, he suggests. Thank you for that. I work in a chemist, says Ben, and school kids already buy lots of condoms on their lunch hour. The gentleman just made it sound... You're being called a gentleman, Dr. John. The gentleman just made it sound as though if they are given condoms, that suddenly makes sex readily available, which just isn't the case.
Not what I said exactly.
And Elaine says, I feel very strongly that too much is being passed on to schools to do. What are the parents actually doing? Which is an interesting point of view there.
Yeah, we've had some on Facebook as well. I think they're all kind of with me and you, actually, Beth. Susie says yes. Christine says, of course. And Amy says, absolutely. We can't change the fact that young people are having sex, so we should at least make sure they're protected and know how to stay safe.
We do think it's only right to finish today's programme with our guest, Coral's new single. Coral, would you like to introduce it for us?
I'm Coral, and this is Daisy Chain. I hope you like it.
Truth to say is better for the health of my days change. Hi, I'm Mark Kermode and I listen to Women Today.
Women Today, brought to you by citywing.com for your next flight away.
For me, the word homeless conjures up a really, really specific image. The cold and hungry person begging for spare change on the streets of a large city. But as that isn't a sight we often see over here, if ever, does that mean that we don't have an issue with homelessness? Well, to talk about that this afternoon, we are joined in the studio by the Director and Centre Manager of Housing Matters Isle of Man, Neil Mellon. Neil, thanks very much for being here. You
My
deal
pleasure.
with this issue day in, day out, and I'm guessing by the very fact we have a charity working with the issue of homelessness that it is an issue over here. So when you think of the word homeless, Neil, what do you think of?
I would say up until a couple of years ago, I'd be guilty, like a lot of people, of thinking of the man, grubby, bearded, in rags, sleeping in a doorway, perhaps smelling of alcohol, stale urine, untidy, unkempt. And it's just so not the way with the clients that we meet.
What is the truth then?
We have a significant number of people who need help with housing issues. And I think we have to look at our definition of homelessness, which is somebody who either doesn't have somewhere to live or is living in temporary accommodation. And that might be a car or a lorry cab or sleeping rough on a boat. It's also people who are sofa surfing, living with friends from day to day, or perhaps sharing a garden shed with somebody, or somebody who is at home but is vulnerable either because of physical or mental bullying, harassment, threats.
So do we have an idea of how many people would officially be classed as homeless on the Isle of Man as we speak at the moment?
No. Nobody on the island has that information. There's no legal responsibility on the government of the Isle of Man to provide emergency accommodation. So they don't. The government does have a responsibility for people under the ages of 18 and over 65, so they're dealt with differently. But nobody captures that information. And part of that reason is pride. Nobody wants to own up to either being homeless or having difficulty with their accommodation.
But, you know, this is a really, really small place, Neil. We're talking about, you know, something that's 30 miles long. How can someone end up with nowhere to live over here?
We have a whole raft of situations. No day is the same. So, for example, today we have seen 6 people with different issues. 4 of them are women, which is interesting because that wouldn't be the norm. We've taken probably over 20 calls, and we've made over 20 calls to different people in relation to the work that we do. But the reasons why people have problems with homelessness could start with waking up beside your husband to find he's dead, and suddenly the main breadwinner isn't there, the person who's paid all the bills isn't there, the person who knows how to get money out of the bank account isn't there to do it.
And have you had experience
We've
with somebody
had experience
in that?
with this, yes. I've worked with a client recently who is young middle-aged, with children with advanced breast cancer, who was being evicted because the children were too noisy. I have to say we've resolved that, and the landlord actually was exceptionally positive and welcoming of our advice and did everything possible to try and change that situation. Initially, when we met with this client, she had 4 weeks' notice of eviction. We got that extended initially to 9 months, and then on the landlord decided that he was going to sell his property. It was proven too stressful, but agreed to work with us to find a buyer who would want to have a sitting tenant, and that's exactly what's happened, and the new landlord has agreed to keep that tenant in. So problem resolved, but that's taken many hundreds of hours of work.
I'm interested in what you said about the fact that today you have seen 4 women, and that is actually quite unusual, because I'm sure I read somewhere that women are more likely to go under the radar when it comes to homelessness because they have maybe a bigger social circle, they might have more sofa options to sleep on. Is that the case?
My experience is we get more men calling in to see us. Now, they might talk about having children, a lot will talk about having ex-partners or people that they're estranged from. but by far we see more male clients than female.
I'm really interested also in the fact you keep referring to the people you support as clients, because it's almost as if it's more of a business arrangement rather than charity intervention.
We are established as a charity on the island. We are Manx Charity. But to be a registered charity, you're a registered company. But at the end of the day, these are people who are coming to us for a service, which is help, advice, support. And that's what we offer.
So in terms of what Housing Matters Isle of Man can actually do, you've talked about the negotiations that you've had with landlords. What else can you provide? I mean, can you actually give somebody accommodation?
We can't give accommodation. We don't own properties or have access to properties. What we do is we help people find accommodation or better accommodation by working with them, finding out what sort of properties they're after and where. We scour local newspapers for ads. We devise our own bulletin for properties that are available and use that with both the clients and with professionals. So our information sheet, the accommodation list that we put out weekly, will go out to professionals in social care, in education, in healthcare, mental health, out to the prisons, etc.
I'm really intrigued by that. You say the prison. Do you do quite a lot of work up there?
We do one visit a month. I go up on a Monday once a month and spend an afternoon there, usually about 3 hours, and we'll see between 3 and 5 prisoners. Normally this will be people who are coming up for release, and we know, and the evidence shows, is that if prisoners come out and they know that they've got accommodation to go to or something set up for them to have that meeting to get their accommodation quickly, they know about their benefits, then they're less likely to reoffend.
You've talked about how many hours it can take to sort out a specific problem for one of your clients. Have you got a rough idea of how much it costs on a person-to-person basis from the charity's point of view?
We've not worked it out on a charge per head, and I think that would be a bit hard to do. We can see a client and have their problem resolved in 30 minutes. That gives them all the advice, all the information that they need. They're self-sufficient. They can go out and get the accommodation from the information we give them. Equally, we can have an interview last. The longest single interview was 4.5 hours, at which stage we had to terminate and say, you have to leave because we now have to try and put things into action for you. Most people we can resolve in a one-off situation, so it's very much a one-stop shop, but we can see people on repeat visits. But again, some of those cases will go on much longer. Currently working with a lady in her 80s who's facing eviction. Has never missed a payment, never had a problem, but because of consequences has faced an eviction. And there's a lot of hours being put into work on and off island to try and prevent that.
Would you say that your job is rewarding or frustrating?
Oh, the job is exciting. It's challenging. I can use skills from my background in problem solving, and it's all very much about problem solving. Even if we don't know the answer, we will go out and find the answer. One of the challenges is there's no book on the shelf that says the answer to housing problems, or the housing to social problems, and the housing to the problem with relationships. We tend to make the rules up as we go along. We find an answer to each problem.
You say you can refer back to some of your background, and that was largely in nursing. So how did you get into this job then, Neil?
I was a director with the Housing Matters for a number of years. I retired from Nobles in August of last year. I went into retirement mode for all of 6 weeks, which was great fun. And my wife thought she had me then to do all the jobs I'd never caught up with in 39 years. Our organisation, Housing Matters, was actually looking at having to close. We just weren't financially viable at that stage. We were having to take all the appropriate steps that every registered company has to take to remain legal and remain functional. Our manager at that time, who we had for many years, Jo Chapman, who you might remember, you might have met before, she returned home to England for personal reasons, and it was highly unlikely that as an organisation we could recruit a manager who would come in, be in probation, with the prospect of us closing the company and expecting them to stay on to close it professionally and hand over to somebody else, if we could find anyone to do it. I was retired, I had a bit of time, and effectively I got parachuted into that role for 6 months. That was to finish at Easter. I liked it too much. My wife's still trying to forgive me for extending it, but I do get a lot of satisfaction from it, and I know that we make a difference.
So now we're talking about single-sex education, boys' schools and girls' schools. And I think it's probably something that we all do have an opinion on. And while there's still some stigma attached to single-sex schools and definitely stereotypes attached to them as well, there has been a recent surge of interest in all boys and all girls' schools. Now, it's not something currently on offer on the island, but we want to know what you think. Is single-sex education a good idea? You can text 166 177 or email womentoday@manxradio.com to share your gut reaction to that or your own personal experience as well. And Jo, you went to an all-girls school, so I'm assuming that you're for it then.
No, not necessarily. I had a really good experience at my girls' school, and I think this is where this is actually going to come into our conversation a lot today, is your own individual experience, of course. I had a great time there, and we used to walk around with like almost this Oxy 10, it was like Tipp-Ex on your spots and things, because we didn't care what we looked like, and it was great the fact that there was no boys there that we felt that we had to dress up to or look the part towards. However, notice how I jumped to that first rather than the actual education. That's not good, is it? But when it comes to education, I think we had less distraction. So I actually do think that we concentrated an awful lot better. My kids both go to a mixed school, so this is where I am kind of sitting on the fence, because I think they're getting a really broad experience of obviously being educated around girls and boys. But I do believe the one thing that helped me through my education was the lack of distraction. I really do believe that.
I totally agree with you, but it's an interesting subject really, because I'm in two heads about this one, depending on whether I'm thinking about it from my boys' point of view or from my daughter's. My eldest son, in his first year, he was in a class of 21, 17 of those were boys, and honestly I used to go in there sometimes and help read. I left with a beard, there's that much testosterone in the room. It was just absolutely wild. Contrastly, my middle son was in a class where there were more girls. It was just a much calmer, much more, it just seems like a much more productive environment. So I kind of think from the boys' point of view, I think I'd prefer them to be in a mixed environment. But from my daughter's point of view, maybe sort of going on my own experience when I was at a single-sex school for a little while, and then they introduced boys. That was
your downfall.
Yeah.
It depends on the person that you are, doesn't it?
Okay. I really enjoyed school. I went to mixed school all the way up, and I think it was really, really good for me to have both boys and girls. I think, I'm sure there was some distraction, but there was enough distraction from girls and gossip and that kind of way that teenage girls can be. I think that on its own would have been too much, and I think there were too much attention or distraction by the boys was too much as well. I think it was really good for me to have that balance. Instinctively, I'm not really a massive fan of single-sex schools because I don't really understand why you would want to go to one or send your child to one when for the rest of their lives they're going to have to mingle in a society of both men and women, and why you don't want them to get used to that at an early stage and learn to adapt in that environment.
Now, interestingly, both our guests today, Emma Quirk and Zeba Clark, you both went to all-girls schools.
Yeah.
Emma, what's your point of view on this?
I'm similar to you because I have a daughter and a son, and I would really like my daughter to go to an all-girls school because we were very focused learning. We didn't worry about dressing up. We used to drive past the mixed school on the way to school and they would be rolling up their skirts. We didn't care until the last 10 minutes of the day when it was a really quick change before we left. But during the day it was very focused learning. We could ask questions. We weren't scared about being laughed at by the boys or trying to make a good impression. However, I kind of think that my boy needs to understand girls. He needs to understand female relationships, and to remove him from that. And seeing some of the all-boys schools around my girls' school, too much testosterone, too physical in the playground sometimes, and I don't know. I'm glad that there isn't the option on the island because I don't want to make that decision.
Zeba, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just remember finding school really peculiar because I went to co-ed school until I was 9, and then I went to boarding school for the rest of my schooling. And I remember really vividly an English lesson where the teacher perhaps didn't have as much classroom control as she should. We were about 14 or 15, so, peak puberty, and a gardener walked past the window and the entire class ran to the window and climbed on the chairs, and they were like, Garfield on a car. Like, that's a man! And I just thought, this is a bit peculiar. So I think that for both girls and boys, there are downsides to that segregation of sexes. And certainly as a mum, I'm happy my boys went to
I've got the Diet Coke advert going through my head right now, 11 o'clock, outside, but a gardener, really.
Yeah. And he was quite cute, I'll give him that.
Well, we'd like to know your thoughts on this. We've already got a number of texts and emails here. Nick from the Sweet Shop in Castletown said he was educated at a private boarding school, boys only, horrendous. He only discovered girls at 20. Oh, so much wasted time. And Anne has texted in to say, I went to a school where the boys had their building and the girls their school, but they were so close that we had a joint playground on the field, so we mixed at break time, which seemed to work really well.
You
I
think
think that's a really, really good idea.
Very good for spin the bottle.
I think the only problem with splitting academically, and this comes purely from my own experience, at university I had a friend who had been at an all-boys school, and it was only when he got to university at 19 he said to me, I didn't realise girls could be as intelligent, or if not more intelligent than me. I just thought that disappointing if you get to 19 and not realise that. And we've also had some comments on Facebook. Karen says, I went to a mixed infant junior school and girls' private high school. For me personally, this was a good mix of education. Teenage years in school are enough to cope with without worrying about the opposite sex. I still played with boys and girls out of school, so wasn't missing out socially speaking.
Jo?
Andrea says, went to an all-girls school, loved it.
And Isla says, I was never a fan in theory, but now having a boy and seeing how differently boys and girls learn, I can certainly see advantages.
Well, our guest this afternoon has been described by BBC Radio 2's Mark Radcliffe as a superb Highland harper. She is from the village of Ullapool, but no stranger to the Isle of Man, as she comes over here once a month to teach the Manx harp to youngsters. She's gained a reputation worldwide for being an ambassador of Manx music on the Celtic harp, and is going to be performing early next month with her trio at the Centenary Centre in Peel. She is Rachel Hare, and just before we speak to her, let's hear her in action. Rachel, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Just tell us about that piece of music we were just hearing.
Yeah, that's one of the tracks from our new album. We released a new album called Three a few months ago, and three means three in Scottish Gaelic, but also in Manx Gaelic as well.
So do you speak Scottish Gaelic?
I speak a little bit of it, enough to kind of get by. So, but yeah, that piece is a tune called The Duke of Fife's Welcome to Deeside, and it's one of my favourite tunes ever, actually.
It's an incredible sounding instrument, the harp. When did you first start playing?
I started playing when I was 10 years old, when I was a youngster up in the Highlands, and yeah, just kind of continued on from there, and eventually went on to study music at uni, and it just became my whole life, really.
So what is the difference between a Celtic harp and an ordinary harp?
Well, there's a few differences. There's kind of quite technical differences. The Celtic harps are a little bit more portable, so they can handily fit in the back seats of your cars. With the harps that you have in orchestras, you need a full-on Volvo estate and a lot of muscles to move them around.
So you have got a harp next to you. This is
Yes.
a Celtic harp.
Yep, this is a Celtic harp. Yep, and it's got 34 strings. The ones in the orchestras tend to have a lot more strings. And I also have these things called levers, which are little metal things which give me extra notes. And on the harps in the orchestras, they have pedals instead of levers, which is a bit crazy. You see harp players playing in orchestras and their feet are moving around, pressing pedals as they play. So
if you can play one, can you play the other?
You kind of can. I could get a tune out of the orchestral harp, but I wouldn't be able to play the big pieces that they would play in orchestras without a lot of work.
How difficult is it to learn to play at all?
Well, the great thing about the harp is that it's very hard to make it sound bad, which is especially good if you're just beginning. It's kind of like an upright piano. If you imagine the piano notes, we've got strings instead of the piano notes. So you can kind of pluck away a tune. We had, the presenter earlier was just came in and gave a little bit of Frere Jacques.
Stu Peters did very well. It was impressive.
I was impressed. Really impressed that he could play it at all.
Yeah, if you've got a musical bone, you'll be able to pick something out. But it's a little bit more tricky to get two hands going at the same time. That's where it kind of gets a bit harder.
Jo is itching to have a go.
I really am. I'm so tempted.
You just go and have a go there while we keep talking. I'm just trying to think of people that I've seen playing the harp, and I can only think of one man who I've come across who plays it. Would you say it's really a woman's instrument?
Stereotypically, in Scotland and kind of Ireland, Isle of Man, and in the orchestral world, it's kind of thought as being a women's instrument. But nowadays, there's a lot more kind of men starting to play. I've got a few young male students who are really doing pretty awesome things actually on the harp. So, but stereotypically, it has got that kind of image.
We're going to be talking a little bit more about your teaching over here later, but I just wondered how you first ended up over here.
Yeah, well, my partner's from the Isle of Man. We met at a music festival in Wales, about 7-8 years ago now, and I kind of started coming over and visiting him, and then eventually kind of the harp players found out I was coming over, so I used to do odd lessons, and kept on kind of coming back and forth, and then my boyfriend Adam decided to move over to Scotland, and he did that, and then a few weeks later they organised me to be the harp teacher on the island. So he left the island and I ended up getting a job here, so I spend more time here than he does.
Well, your partner Adam is also the star of a viral video that's doing the rounds. Tell us about that.
He's part of a band called McLear, and their video on Facebook has got well over 1 million hits, well over 1 million views, and it was just, it's been kind of nicknamed the Fiddlesticks tune. One guy starts playing fiddle, and then Adam comes in and starts playing, and it's a good one. Look it up on Facebook. They're a group called McLear, and yeah, my boyfriend's the one who has the toes kind of going in the background because he's wearing flip-flops. It was in Lorient, it was hot at the time, so that's his excuse.
Now, I did say that you are known as a worldwide expert on playing Manx music on the harp. Where have you been to spread the word?
Yeah, well, when you're a harp player, you get asked obviously to do concerts and things like that, but a lot of it is to do with teaching. There's harp festivals, Celtic harp festivals that happen all around the world. So I've been to Moscow in Russia, Spain, France, America, Switzerland, Italy, and in many of these places I've taught Manx students. So I've taught literally hundreds of Celtic harpists Manx music. So the tunes are being played worldwide now, which is really exciting.
Why do you think harp music is so popular internationally, particularly Manx harp music?
I guess the kind of Celtic music thing is always it's always on the up just now, I kind of feel. And with the harp, it's quite, as I was saying, it's quite an easy instrument to pick up. And a lot of people have this kind of view that it's the angel's instrument. A lot of people will say, I tend to get a lot of adult students who come to these festivals and they're like, it's always been my dream since I was a child to play the harp. And yeah, they get older and they decide to take it up. So yeah.
When you go to these far-flung places, you always take some Manx souvenirs with you. Which ones?
I usually I'm kind of known for when I teach that, we have to have like a kind of sugar rush break halfway through. We'll learn the melody, have a bit of sugar rush. So yeah, been known to take Manx fudge and kind of a wee jar of Manx knobs. And a flag as well to like put above where I teach so they know where they are.
No, I'm not saying it. You're looking at me to say something. I'm not saying it. I'm behaving myself, Beth.
Okay. I just thought maybe you had a question, Jo. Maybe save it for later. As hearing you travel all over with a harp, despite the fact that this one that you have next to you is slightly smaller and more portable, it's still not the easiest thing to carry around.
No, they're not the easiest things. Although luckily my one's actually a little bit shorter than this one. And I have a flight case that it kind of fits round it. But yeah, you do get kind of people stopping and asking you, what's that at the airport? And I'm just trying to keep my head down. When it's 6 a.m. in the morning, you don't really want to have two big long conversations with people.
Thanks as always to our amazing guests. And as ever, it's never too late for you to get involved. Head over to Facebook, find the Women Today Facebook page, and you can comment there, or you can follow us at MR Women Today on Twitter. And you can listen again to the full programmes on manxradio.com, or join us every weekday live from just after 2 o'clock.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com.
Love being Shaw.
Terms and conditions apply.